Okay, so for this podcast lecture, I want to talk just briefly about something I know nothing about: curriculum. I'm not a curriculum guy. We have entire degree programs for curriculum and instruction. And man, that is not something I was any good at. In fact, I hardly even remember any of my instruction back in my undergraduate days at Baylor University 25 years ago about curriculum. I'm sure we talked about it. I'm sure it came up in class, and I just don't know anything about it. In fact, I knew so little about curriculum that when I started teaching back in 1999 at Eastern Hills High School in Fort Worth, Texas, and Fort Worth ISD, I was handed a textbook and a giant kit of workbooks, vocabulary, worksheets, you name it, it was in that kit. And I thought that's what teaching was. You're going to get a book, they're going to hand you a kit, and you're going to teach out of it. And that is not how teaching works at all. Of course, I was a young novice, and they also shoved me into a biology lab to teach world geography to about 35 kids. But such is life in public ed. But I digress. It took me some time, maybe even a little bit of master's work, before I even began to grasp an understanding of what curriculum is. So curriculum is simply all the parts that make up what you're going to be teaching. So textbook is part of your curriculum. Lesson plans are, of course, part of your curriculum. So all those workbooks that I was handed, vocabulary worksheets, anything that you need. I look at it as curriculum are the tools that you need to go into a classroom and instruct, because instruction is separate from curriculum. In addition, standards are separate from instruction and help build your curriculum. And lastly, there's assessment. So all those things should be linear: standards, curriculum, instruction, assessment, a separate conversation for a separate time. But I want to talk about curriculum because, frankly, anything could be curriculum. If your standards are set, and they are because you have your TEKS, that helps build your curriculum. So sometimes school districts hand you a curriculum. Some of you have used C-Scopes or Texas Resource System, whatever it's called. Some of your school districts write their own curriculum. So you've got entire people that are writing curriculum for you and handing it to you, and however that's delivered. But anything can be curriculum. In fact, I write curriculum all the time here at Texas Women's. When I build out this course, I have to think intently about what is it that you need to know? When do you need to know it? And what sequence it has to be done. How does it fit into the standards for the Texas Principal Competencies? Because I have to think ultimately you're going to take a test, and the things that you learn need to be tied to that test somehow. So that's curriculum. And I'm constantly writing curriculum and trying to make things better, which is why I want your feedback. And if something's not great, I want to know about it. So some of the things I've been adding to my curriculum are things like this: podcast lectures, where I try to talk to you in the audience. And it's not just a lecture all the time. It's really more of a radio interview, because I'm much more comfortable talking like this than I would in a lecture format. In fact, I miss everybody. I wish we had more face-to-face classes where this discussion was organic and we could go back and forth, but you get to hear me talk, and I like to talk. So here we go. So this is part of the curriculum. But I digress. When you think about all of that and how it applies, think about this. What do you do as a school leader when you're faced with a curriculum that maybe people don't like? Or maybe your teachers have brought something into their curriculum, they didn't really evaluate it well, or maybe they don't think it's inappropriate, but when you look at it, it's highly inappropriate. Or maybe it's overly religious, or maybe it's something that parents are going to be mad about. We're dealing with this now in my son's school district, and you may have heard about some of this on the news. You've got a contingency of folks out there that think that there's lewd and lascivious and pornographic materials in some of our school libraries. Now, I can't speak for every school library across North Texas or even beyond, but it might be possible that some of these materials haven't been vetted appropriately. Now, I figure school districts are doing the right thing. They've got a team of people. They're following some guidelines, whether that's local or state guidelines. They've got the right people on the bus figuring these things out. But ultimately, as I always say, whenever there's an issue, it's a principal that has to deal with it. So be thinking about that. How are you going to deal with it when someone phones you or emails you and says, hey, my kids are learning about this horrible thing over here. What are you doing about it? That might be something that you'll have to address and be confronted with whenever you're a school leader. And I also think it's something that you need to know how your school district handles, because you might be faced with some of these curriculum controversies. It's happening. It's happening in North Texas. And it's happening a lot across the state and across the country. In fact, I just wrote a paper on it. If you want to read my paper, I'll be happy to share it. Because the reality is that school boards, superintendents are having to deal with now questions about curriculum. There used to be a time where teachers and educators were kind of trusted to do the right thing and support the right thing. And I believe teachers are doing that. But sometimes it happens. Teachers try to do something that might be a little off script, or they're trying to do something to supplement what they're already doing. And they might go into an area that's uncomfortable for some parents, some students, and maybe a little bit controversial. So in these days, in these trying political times where we're unfortunately far more divided than we are together on issues, this might be one of those things that you have to keep in the back of your mind. What do we do about complex and controversial curriculum issues and how they might invade our classroom? What's the best way to handle it? What's the best way to support our teachers who genuinely might be doing the right thing? Or what's the best way to support our students who aren't comfortable sitting through those classroom settings? I mean, it's happening with this critical race theory. There's no critical race theory in Texas, but there are people who believe that it's out there. So how do we address those questions to make sure that they feel safe in the things that they want their kids to know, but at the same time, we're teaching the right things in the classroom that all kids should know? It's a valid question that I want you to consider and I want you to think about.
Time I want to talk to you a little bit about student discipline. As you're training and learning and earning your master's degree to become an administrator, one of the things that no one told me when I started my master's program is that student discipline will be the bulk of the work that I do, especially when you become an assistant principal. And even then, when you become a principal, it's going to be part of the work that you do. The reality is that you end up doing a lot of student discipline because it falls under the purview of an administrator to keep a safe and orderly environment. Part of that is student safety, and student discipline falls under that student safety. Problem is, nobody told me that when I started the job, and I got to tell you, I hated student discipline. I could not stand it. It was one of the chores of the job of an administrator that I just did not like and did not want to do. I think a lot of that stems from the fact that I was probably not a great kid growing up anyway. I was one of those kids that challenged teachers and sort of pushed them to the brink. I was one of those students that questioned when maybe I shouldn't have questioned. Teachers didn't always like that. So I always had a deep understanding and a heart for some of the kids that came through my office, the ones that had some issues or some problems here and there, or some general behavior issues. I always kind of had a heart for those kids. I always kind of felt like I knew where they were coming from or why they were acting the way that they were. And another reason why I didn't always like doing discipline was because, frankly, some of their teachers were just boring, and I knew that. Students act up when they're not engaged, and that is the plain and simple truth of it, and the research backs that up. So what I wanted to do for this lecture here is I wanted to make sure that you find a way to embrace doing the job of student discipline, and make sure that if you're going to do it, that you have some sort of methodology about it. I'm not going to say that you enjoy doing student discipline, but I do think that you can make it more palpable, or at least find a system that works for you when it comes to students that come into your office and need to be dealt with per the Code of Conduct. And so let's start with that. You'll see that I've posted some resources about the Code of Conduct. I've asked you to look up your school district or any other Texas school district's Code of Conduct. And it's a document that you're going to want to review. And it's a document you're going to want to have handy. What I did, and I recommend that you do the same, is you print a copy of that Code of Conduct. Have it close by so that when a student is sent to your office for a referral, that to make sure that the referral it fits the definition of the code of conduct. Most of the time it's going to. The code of conduct language is actually quite vague, and it's got enough language in there to sort of support any reason why a student would come through your office. So it's pretty easy to make any of the allegation against the child stick. But that being said, you might want to make sure that you review it to understand what a student can get in trouble for and then how the consequences are applied. Have a student code of conduct handy. Make sure that you print it out, understand and know the language inside of it, and then know how it applies to the student. The second thing I would say to you about student discipline is, and this is something you need to tell your teachers, and if you yourself are a teacher right now, I think something that's important for you to understand is that student discipline actually starts inside the classroom, and it's a collective responsibility that doesn't solely fall to administrators to complete and to conduct. I think there are a lot of teachers that misunderstand that. They often treat their administrators as the individual that's responsible for doing only the discipline for the campus, and that is not true. The administrator is handling discipline because it is a last resort. It is not the first resort. Discipline starts in their classroom. It starts with rules, behaviors, consequences, contacting with parents, routines, etc. Some of the things that are very, very important. And most importantly, building relationships, which is something that some teachers aren't very good at, nor do they want to do. All of that being said, you've got to look for ways and patterns to figure out if you've got frequent flyers coming out of certain classrooms, certain teachers, because they're not handling the business inside the classroom themselves. And I would also point out that, once the teacher sends that child to the office for a referral, it's kind of out of their hands. And it's a way of them telling you that I've done everything that I can do, so now I need you to step in and do what you can do. That's the way the referral should be communicated when it comes to the teacher-administrator relationship. So I want to make sure that you make that clear to your teachers too. That's because once they send them to you and you get it and you talk to the kid and you review the code of conduct and you review the referral, and let's say you decide just to talk to them or just to sit them down and give them a timeout for 10, 15 minutes, whatever you decide to do that's pretty low end, teacher may not agree with it and they may not like it. And then that's when they start throwing around things like, well, they don't feel supported. So you have to remind them that, hey, you know what? The longer they're out of the classroom, the less time they are engaged in learning. So discipline, again, is one of those last resort sort of things. The third thing that I would say about student discipline as we talk about and wrap up this topic is parent communication is obviously important. And so while you expect the teacher to do their level of parent communication, you as an administrator will also do your level of parent communication, especially if you start to see the same frequent flyers coming through your office on a regular basis. You're going to start to build a relationship with those parents quickly. So let me just kind of put you in the perspective of those parents. It's likely that those parents of kids who are frequent flyers when it comes to discipline, they know their kids have difficulties in school. They know that they have some challenges. This won't be a surprise to the parent. It won't be a surprise that they get the phone call or the text or however it is you're communicating or email these days. You got to be sure that you have some sort of sympathy or empathy for the parent as, the kid continues to put them in difficult spots when it comes to student discipline. And I would always use sort of the phrase, I'm sorry your son or daughter has put you in this position, or let's work together to try to create a way to support your child. You'll figure out the language that works best for you based upon the relationship you have with the parent. But they absolutely know that their child is a challenge. So getting that phone call from you or that email shouldn't be a surprise. However, you will get from time to time pushback from parents because some parents have blinders on and they believe that their child can do no wrong and does no wrong. They also have parents that will always believe their child over you or the adult in the room, no matter what the consequence is and no matter how much documentation you have or the the information that you have. So just know that going into it, that you might have some difficult parents who are going to give you some pushback because their baby can do no wrong. What I would say to you is that if you are consistent, you're fair, and again, you follow that code of conduct, and you use the language inside of the code of conduct. That's very important here. Using that language in order to communicate with parents what the difficulties are, what the challenges are, and what the consequences are, then you're going to be fine. You never ever challenge a parent on what they think they know, and the parents will never challenge you on what you think you know. You stick to the facts, stick to the language in the code of conduct, and communicate that with the parents. It doesn't have to be an argument, and what you say goes. Generally, what happens as an assistant principal is if you issue a consequence for a student behavior issue, the only person that can be appealed to is the principal, and I would bet 100% of the time you're probably going to be backed up by your campus principal given the circumstances. It's very rare that ever happens anyway, which is why communication with your campus principal is so important. The last thing that I would add when it comes to student discipline is that it's something that you're going to have to practice. The first time that you face with a student consequence or a student referral in your office, you're likely not going to be very good at it the first time. That's a moment where you want to spend some time and build relationships and talk to kids, try to figure out what's going on in their world and try to make connections between their behavior and what's going on. Is it a teacher issue? Is it a boredom issue? Is it an engagement issue? Is there something larger happening here? You want to try to figure out what the root of the problem is so that you don't have these problems in the future. Now, yes, you're going to get general kid problems, someone pushing and shoving or poking each other with pencils. That's pretty common when it comes to maybe elementary or middle school. If you're going to be doing high school, you might get something larger, obviously, like fights, and those are automatic placements of DAEP anyway, so those are real easy to handle. Drugs, alcohol, knives, possessions of weapons, those kind of things. That's easy. You're going to push those kids off the DAEP. That's just the way it's written in the Code of Conduct, and those are simple to handle. But, smaller issues, petty theft, or it may be a bullying issue or things like that. Those are the ones that you want to get inside, collect some documentation, and sort of build support and try to figure out what the root of the problem is so that you can nip it in the bud before it becomes something bigger. So that's about it when it comes to student discipline. I would really encourage you to read and understand the Student Code of Conduct for your school district so that you know what's within your scope that you can and cannot do when it comes to student discipline, because that's going to be the basis of the work that you do as an assistant principal.
Okay, so the next big thing that I want to talk about is I want to talk about this concept called crucial conversations. Now, I'm borrowing that term because it belongs actually to a book that was written by Carrie Patterson, Joseph Greene, Ron McMillan, and Al Switzler. But the concept behind the book is something that I think is actually very valuable. And if you want to take the time to read it, of course, please do, because it offers some amazing insights. But it's a needed skill, frankly. It's what do we do when we approach having those very difficult conversations? And not just talking about in the workplace, but maybe we're talking about quality of life, or maybe we're talking about relationships, or obviously work issues. But it's any of those conversations that come about when the stakes are high, the stress is high, the emotion is going to be high. So they talk a lot about, negotiating a salary, or maybe you're firing an employee. All of those concepts. But let's be honest for a minute. When we are in leadership roles, having crucial or difficult conversations is just frankly part of the job. And it's a part of the job that's not easily accepted by those who take it. It's very difficult. When you're in that position that you have to let somebody go, you have to fire them, you have to non-renew their contract, whatever the case may be, or you have to reprimand something maybe on an issue that you don't agree with, it's never easy to approach any of those conversations. And believe me, I've been there. I've done that. Even before I had a book like Crucial Conversations to kind of walk me through some of the concepts that I probably wish I had known then before I approached the conversation. Because let's be real, sometimes they didn't go well. And not every conversation that you have with somebody, whether difficult or not, is going to go well either. But I'm thinking about a time where I had to have a difficult conversation with someone, and I was working higher ed at the time. And what I needed to do with this individual is I was going to move them out of one department and put them with another department. And then they were going to be reporting to somebody that I knew they had a conflict with. So now we have a situation where you're going to be reporting to someone that you don't like and you already have a conflict with. And now I have to be the one to be the bearer of that bad news and share that information. Now, I knew the conversation wasn't going to go well. I anticipated it from the beginning, and I expected that it was going to go bad. So let me just kind of give you some tips and tricks that I went through to have this particular crucial conversation because it helped sort of make things better. Not the best scenario, but it was kind of better. So let's kind of walk through some of those things that I did. And feel free to take notes or take some mental notes as we walk along this crucial conversation journey. First thing you want to do is kind of prepare yourself mentally for the conversation that you're about to have. Maybe sit down about a day or so before the conversation, make out some mental notes, write it down on a piece of paper, the things that you want to convey during the meeting. That way, when you actually have it, you know what you want to say, and you can anticipate particular questions you might get or and sort of convey an important message that you want to say as you progress. Because if you're just kind of going in there and you're going to wing it, things won't go well, and you won't prepare yourself exactly for what you need to say when it needs to be said. Then after you've kind of got your thoughts together, you want to choose the right time and the right place to have this conversation. That's going to be up to you, thinking about that and the relationship that you have with this person. I mean, if you're going to fire somebody, typically 4:30 on a Friday is typically best. But if it's not the kind of conversation you're going to have, maybe you're just being a bearer of some other kind of bad news, you want to be strategic about the right time and the right place to have it. Now, as a former principal, I can tell you that always the best place to have some of these conversations is never in your office. And I've said this more than one occasion, because you can't leave your office, or if you choose to leave your office, it's going to be a little weird. So if you're going to have a difficult conversation with somebody, try to have it on their terms, on their turf. I also recommend that depending on whatever the situation is, that you show a little empathy and you show a little understanding towards the other person, particularly in their perspective, and always acknowledge any emotions that they might be having regarding this. You're giving some tough news, or you're about to have some tough concepts that are about to be shared. You really should be empathetic. If you're not empathetic, you come across as a hard person, that may escalate the situation and make things worse. So be prepared to have a little bit of empathy. And when you're talking, try to use I statements. Never use the word you. When you say you, like you always or you never, you tend to be a little accusatory. It comes across the wrong way, and the other person perceives it wrong. But if you say things like I feel or I notice, then you kind of take blame out of the conversation, and it makes it a little easier for the flow of the dialogue to happen. Now, after you've delivered that bad news, be prepared to be an active listener. Practice listening, really reflecting on what the person has to say, understand their viewpoint, pay attention to detail, show emotion, show that empathy, but be an active listener. In fact, while they're talking, maybe you want to take some notes, write some things down. You might learn something from the conversation that you didn't know before. Some information might reveal itself, and it gives you an opportunity to think and be reflective instead of being reactive. Because again, as these things become more emotional, you yourself could become emotional, and that's kind of the last thing that you want. The conversation can turn quite quickly. Something else to consider is to stay focused on the issue. Whatever that issue is, you want to stay focused on it. At times, when people find themselves painted into a corner, what they'll often do is start playing the blame game. Well, such and such did that, or this happened on such and such time. When that happens, it sort of deflects the blame, or it pulls off the point of the conversation from that person, and it puts another light on something else. Well, that's not why you're here, and that's not why we're having this conversation. So I always want to try to bring things back to the point of why we're talking. You also want to be flexible, be open-minded, be willing to consider other perspectives, especially if new information has come to light. And if the conversation turns negative, don't be afraid to take a pause. Even during the conversation, take a deep breath, relax yourself so that you don't let your emotions get the best of you. You want to stay flexible with your approach, adjust your stance if you have to, depending on the information that you're given. And the last bit of advice that I would give is follow up with the person.
You don't want to damage a relationship with somebody, whether it's a working relationship or a personal relationship, without following up and seeing that things are going better or have improved. That you could also give some clarity to the conversation you just had. You can also reinforce any agreements or disagreements that occurred, because remember, you are in a leadership position. So if you're asking this person to follow through with something or do something, there does need to be a stream of communication back and forth to ensure that what you expect has been followed. But it can also be done with dignity and respect that the person obviously deserves. Now, I'm not saying having any of these conversations is going to be easy. I'm not saying they're going to go perfect by the textbook, particularly the Crucial Conversations textbook. It's never, ever going to go that way. You hope that it does, but you're going to have some of these conversations that will go off the rails. But if you plan ahead and sort of follow some of these concepts we talked about today, you might be able to temper some of the bad emotions that could come, or just make the conversation better for you in the long run.
Okay, this week we want to continue our conversation on what I call principal effectiveness. Now, last week we talked about, on my rubric, the principal effectiveness evaluation rubric, we talked about domain 1, which was professionalism and ethics. So professionalism and ethics. And so now I want to talk a little bit about domain 2 of the rubric, leadership skills. Now, what's important to note is that, again, this is based upon my research that I did. And I talked a lot about this in the last podcast, but these are skills and strategies that, in my research, deem an effective principal. So again, mountains of research on what makes a great principal. We have all that information. If anything, this just kind of adds to it and confirms that information. But this is based largely on my reaching out to teachers to ask them what makes an ineffective principal. These are teachers that left a principal because they were ineffective and just couldn't handle being on that campus anymore for whatever reason. So finding out what those reasons were, putting it all together and coding it, created this rubric. So last week was professionalism and ethics. This week, I want to talk about leadership skills. So let's break those down. So the first one is builds relationships with faculty and students. Now, I know this probably comes to you like this should be obvious, but believe it or not, it's not very obvious to some people and some individuals. What teachers are looking for in a leader is someone who can really connect with them, someone who understands the members of the school community, knows the students, has that visibility, walks around, knows people, really connects, and goes above and beyond the boss relationship that they might have. And there's an old adage that it's no one cares about the number of degrees that you have, it's the degree of which you care. So that's what teachers are really looking for an individual who knows how to connect with faculty, connect with staff, connect with parents, connect with students, and be a relationship builder, someone who shows humility, someone who shows their human side, and goes above and beyond just that boss relationship, but actually connects and has a human relationship with the people on the school community. The second skill is hiring practices. Now, some of the best principals and folks that I worked for as I was coming up through education were really good people at hiring individuals to work on the campus. This requires a principal to really know and understand how hiring a person is going to enhance the school, make the school better, finding individuals that have skill sets that will add to the school culture and really improve things on the campus. Also, finding people that can work well with other people, great team members. And in a content perspective, making sure that you have great people who can teach great content and know and understand their pedagogy. So hiring is an important aspect of being a great school leader. Now, in my study, it was found that many, many times there were principals who would hire their cousins, their friends, best friends, people they went to school with, people they went to church with. And while a certain amount of nepotism is understandable, when it becomes overtly obvious that you're hiring people that you're connected to
and that individual is not suited for the job that they've been hired for, that's a big red flag for people around you, because it looks like you've just given them a job and they're not any good at it. Not only that, it's likely that that leader is not going to hold that person accountable for the job that they're doing, and other people see that too. Believe it or not, the teachers in my study found that not only do they want to be held accountable, they want others held accountable too. So I think it's important that when you're hiring people, that you avoid hiring people for the wrong reasons, that you're looking for people for the right reasons, to fill a hole from a good to great standpoint, to put the right people in the right seats of the bus, and just making sure that you're having the right people hired for the right job. So hiring practices is a very important skill that you need to have. The next one on the list is professional judgment and decision making. Now, this truly is a skill, particularly in leadership and being a principal. You're not always going to make the best decisions. Sometimes you're going to struggle in the decisions that you make, but it's not really about that necessarily. Sure, people make mistakes, and that's okay. But what we don't want is principals who constantly make mistakes. We also don't want principals who just arbitrarily make decisions without considering all the possibilities. And we also don't want principals who are just making decisions without connecting with others in a shared governance kind of concept. Now, I learned later in my career that this concept of shared governance isn't really something we talk a lot about in K-12 education. It is a well-known higher education term where people really expect to come to the table and share the responsibility of the committee, of the school, the college, the department, whatever. That concept is ingrained in higher education. We're all in this together, and we share the responsibility. Sure, there are leaders and there are bosses and there are people that make the final and ultimate decision, but they don't do that without some sort of shared governance, without people giving and receiving input. Principals should operate very similarly in the same way, and that includes decision making. People don't like to be left out. They don't like to hearing things at the last minute or from out of the blue or from unknown sources. They also don't necessarily like hearing important things via email. So it's important to have a principal who has the skill that can make good professional judgment, good professional decision making, and make sure that all stakeholders are included in some form or fashion. It's really going to set you apart from other leaders. The next leadership skill is visibility and availability. Now, this is pretty important to teachers. They want a principal that is easy to locate, makes their presence known, whether it's in hallways, classrooms, common areas. They make an effort to be on campus on a regular basis. If they're not on campus, then they have designated someone who is also available. What this really comes down to is principals who are hiding in their offices or they're leading via email from behind a computer. Believe me, and I have worked for a principal like this that was just very simply afraid to be on campus. They hid in their office. They were afraid of the students, and they led via email and through arbitrary delegation of authorities. Their visibility just wasn't there. Half the time, I wasn't even sure if my principal was on campus. Now, that was a very long time ago, and I think she probably led under more of an old school management style. She was an older principal, by the way, and look, that was over 20 years ago. But the concept, though, hasn't changed. The teachers want to be able to have access to their principal and their assistant principals on a regular basis. So having visibility, being available to the people that work for you and the campus that you lead is a very important skill that teachers are looking for in their principal. The last one on the list is team building and networking. Teachers want you to be part of their teams. They want you to be part of their conversations. Oftentimes what principals will do is they'll create the PLC concept, so these professional learning communities, or there's content level department meetings, and all of that stuff kind of happens in a vacuum sometimes. It's led by a teacher leader or a team leader or a department head or someone like that. And the principal really doesn't have any engagement in those conversations, which largely revolves around curriculum, instruction, assessment, those kinds of things. Teachers want principals to be involved in those conversations. And now, look, you don't have to be the expert in those fields. You have delegated experts to help lead those departments, but teachers want you to be part of those conversations, and they want to be able to ask you questions, and they want your feedback. So this goes back to what we were talking about in the shared governance. But specifically, when it comes to being part of the team building, creating a coherent atmosphere, sometimes teachers just kind of want you there. They want you there as a participant, and they want you to kind of see how things are going on to make sure that power dynamics aren't disrupted, or someone's not usurping authority, those kinds of things. Teachers feel a little more comfortable when they know that their principal's actively involved in creating very strong teams, which is something we talk about on the master's level all the time, and involved in networking, helping people connect with other people. So that's an important aspect and a skill that you should develop. All right, next week we will talk about Domain 3 of the Principal Effectiveness Rubric, and with this one is just simply teacher and student relationships and advocacy, and it's probably the most important area of the rubric, and so we'll dive into that and break it down next week.